Robert Mitchell Jennings spent nearly 30 years on Texas death row, his life ticking down in a concrete cell after gunning down a Houston police officer in cold blood during a desperate robbery, firing a single shot into the man's head as he lay helpless on the floor. But to understand the rage that exploded that fateful night in 1988, we have to rewind to a childhood forged in rejection and chaos, where survival meant hardening a heart that was never truly given a chance. Born in 1957 in Houston, Texas, Robert entered the world under the darkest of shadows, the result of a brutal rape that left his 16-year-old mother, Flora Jennings, shattered and pregnant. By the time she gave birth at 17, resentment had already taken root. Flora, a young black woman scraping by in the segregated South, often hurled words like weapons at her son. "I never wanted you," she'd spit, blaming him for derailing her dreams of finishing school and building a better life. With no father in sight and her own world unraveling, she couldn't shoulder the load alone. Robert was shuttled off as a toddler to live with his grandmother and great-grandmother on a rundown farm just outside Houston, a place of dusty fields and fleeting stability where the women did their best to fill the void. But love couldn't erase the sting of being unwanted. Around age 6, Flora remarried and brought him back to the city, hoping a new family might stitch things together. Her husband, a distant figure who worked long hours and vanished into the nights, offered no warmth, no guidance for a boy craving a father's steady hand. The marriage crumbled quickly in divorce, leaving Flora to fend for herself, Robert, and their newborn daughter, Carla, born in 1962. Money was a ghost in their cramped apartment. Poverty clawed at every corner, providing just enough for threadbare clothes and sporadic meals. Flora turned to drugs to numb the pain, stumbling home on weekends reeking of escape, while Robert and little Carla were pawned off during the week to an older cousin who watched them more like a babysitter than kin. There were no bedtime stories, no hugs that lingered, just the echo of an empty home, where a boy's pleas for attention dissolved into silence. Was it any wonder that, even as a child, Robert started to withdraw, his moods swinging like a storm cloud, moody and mixed up, as family later described him? Tragedy struck early, carving invisible scars deeper than anyone realized. At a young age, Robert suffered a devastating car accident, the vehicle flipping end over end, slamming his head against the dashboard in a blur of metal and screams. He ended up in the hospital, dazed and bandaged, but the damage lingered, a quiet thief stealing pieces of his focus and fire. Not long after, another blow. A neighborhood kid swung a baseball bat in a fit of rage, cracking it against Robert's skull. More hospital lights, more pain that no child should know. These head injuries, as psychologists would later uncover, left traces of brain dysfunction, abnormalities in his frontal and temporal lobes, fraying the wires that control impulse and reason. Yet in the haze of their struggling home, no one connected the dots. They were just more bruises on a life already black and blue. School became another battlefield. Plunked into special education classes, Robert floundered, his mind, a documented IQ hovering in the mid-60s, teetering on the edge of mild intellectual disability, unable to keep pace with lessons that felt like riddles in a foreign tongue. Truancy became his rebellion. He'd skip classes, wandering Houston's rough streets, testing boundaries that no one at home enforced. By his early teens, the trouble escalated. Petty fights, run-ins with the law that hinted at a fury building beneath the surface. At 14, a judge branded him delinquent and slapped him with probation, a warning shot that echoed hollow in a home without structure. Sent to a trade school at 15, he learned skills like welding, but the pull of the streets was stronger. A year later, at 16, a probation slip-up landed him in a juvenile facility, the first taste of bars closing behind him. And then, at 17, the dam broke. Robert's first adult conviction, for aggravated robbery, earned him 5 years in prison, a harsh sentence that swallowed his youth whole. Paroled but unbroken, he spiraled back in at 20, hit with 2 more aggravated robbery charges and a burglary rap, netting concurrent 30-year terms that chained him to the Texas prison system. Inside, discipline cases piled up, 13 in all, from minor infractions to outright defiance, mirroring a young man whose emotional brakes had long since failed. But beneath the rap sheet, those untreated head wounds and a lifetime of neglect whispered a question. Could a boy born from violence, raised in its shadow, ever outrun the monsters it bred? As Robert clawed his way back to freedom in May 1988, paroled after a decade behind bars, the world would soon find out just how far that pent-up storm could rage. Freedom came knocking for Robert Mitchell Jennings in May 1988, after a decade locked away in Texas prisons for those brutal, aggravated robberies that had stolen his early adulthood. At 30 years old, he stepped out into the humid Houston air, parole papers in hand, with the promise of a fresh start dangling like a fragile thread. But for a man whose life had been a relentless grind of rejection, head injuries, and street survival, that thread snapped quicker than anyone could have feared. Just 2 months later, in the sweltering heat of July, Robert was deep in a crime spree that would etch his name into Houston's darkest headlines. 6 armed robberies in 8 short weeks. Gas stations, corner stores, places where quick cash meant dodging the slow crawl of poverty. Each one chipped away at whatever guardrails parole had tried to install. He had no steady job, no real support network, just the echo of old habits pulling him back into the shadows. Was it desperation? Rage from a lifetime of feeling discarded? Or simply the pull of the only world he'd ever known? Whatever the spark, it ignited a fire that consumed an innocent life on a Tuesday evening that no one saw coming. July 19th, 1988, started like any other sticky summer day in Houston's sprawling suburbs. Robert linked up with David Harvell, a 26-year-old acquaintance from the fringes of the criminal underbelly, a guy looking for easy scores just like him. They hit their first target that afternoon, an adult movie theater on the west side, a seedy spot flickering with neon promises and hidden vices. Masked and armed, Robert wielding Harvell's .38 caliber revolver, they burst in, hearts pounding, demands barked low and urgent. Empty the register. No heroes. The clerk froze, hands shaking as he stuffed bills into a bag. No shots fired this time, just the rustle of cash and the slam of the door behind them. About $300 richer, adrenaline buzzing, they peeled out in Harvell's beat-up car, laughter mixing with labored breaths. High on the rush, they scanned the streets for the next hit. Why stop now? The day's young, the cops are busy, and that empty wallet in Robert's pocket whispered for more. Spotting the familiar glow of another adult bookstore in the Greenway Plaza area, right off Richmond Avenue, a bustling strip of traffic and temptation, they circled back. Robert had cased this place before. In fact, he'd robbed it just 12 days earlier, slipping in like a ghost, gun drawn, snatching whatever loose change the clerk had. Lightning might strike twice. Or so he thought. As the sun dipped low around 7 p.m., casting long shadows over the parking lot, Robert and Harvell pulled up to the bookstore at 4330 Richmond. The sign buzzed faintly, adult books and videos, a nondescript front for the peep show booths, and forbidden reels inside. Harvell killed the engine, nerves twitching. You go in, I'll watch the ride, he muttered, handing over the revolver. Robert nodded, tucking the gun into his waistband, pulling a ski mask low over his face. He slipped out, boots crunching on gravel, heart thumping a rhythm of reckless need. What was racing through his mind in those last free steps? The faces of the family he'd left behind? The parole officer's warnings? Or just the cold math of survival? He pushed open the door, the bell jingling like a mocking chime, and stepped into a scene straight out of nightmare. Inside, the air hung thick with the stale scent of cigarette smoke and desperation. Dim lights flickered over shelves crammed with glossy magazines and video boxes, while in the back, a row of coin-operated booths hummed faintly. But this wasn't just any quiet evening shift. Houston police officer Elston Howard, a bright-eyed 24-year-old vice cop fresh out of the academy, was already there on official business. Elston, everyone called him E or Howie, had pulled the short straw that day, enforcing a city ordinance against unlicensed porn arcades. Badge 2818 pinned to his uniform, vice raid jacket slung over his shoulders, he stood at the counter, paperwork in hand, calmly citing the clerk, Larry Overholt. This is for the arcade violation, no permit. Elston explained in his steady, no-nonsense tone, the kind that came from 2 years on the force and a deep sense of right. Overholt, a middle-aged guy with weary eyes, nodded grimly, knowing a night in jail loomed unless he paid the fine. Elston radioed for a patrol car to haul the clerk away, settling in to wait those few minutes. He was the picture of duty, born September 18, 1963, in Houston, Class 111 graduate, a young black man who joined the force to make a difference, protect his community. At home, a fiancée named Carolyn Thompson dreamed of their future, and his 1-year-old daughter, Taisha Victoria Howard, waited for daddy's stories and hugs. His parents, Era Mae and Alcana, beamed with pride. His 6 siblings, Sheila Renee Agee, Alvanada Michelle Howard, Virginia Howard Lang, Eugene, Alcana Jr., and Calvin, saw him as the steady one, the protector. Elston had no idea that in those quiet moments, scribbling on his citation pad, death was walking through the door. Robert froze for a split second, eyes locking on the uniform. This wasn't the empty register he'd bargained for. No lone clerk, but a cop, gun on his hip, radio crackling softly. Panic surged, hot and blinding. No turning back now. The door had swung shut behind him. This is a robbery. Get down. Robert's voice cracked out, revolver whipping up, mask hiding the sweat beading on his brow. Overholt hit the floor behind the counter, hands up, terror etching his face. Elston, trained but caught off guard, spun toward the threat, hand instinctively dropping toward his service weapon. Police. Drop it, Elston barked, voice steady despite the shock, years of drills kicking in. But Robert was faster, closer, fueled by that pent-up storm from a broken life. The first shot exploded from the .38, a deafening crack that shattered the humid air, slamming into Elston's chest at point-blank range. Blood bloomed dark on his uniform as he staggered back, pain ripping through him like fire. He crumpled to the linoleum floor, gasping, fighting to crawl toward cover, fingers scrabbling for his radio or gun. Help, officer down. The words choked out, weak but desperate. But Robert wasn't done. Horror flickered in his eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen, not like this, but fear overrode it all. He stepped forward, looming over the fallen officer, the revolver steady in his grip. Another shot, then another. 2 more bullets tore into Elston's chest and torso, each one a thunderclap of finality. Elston twitched, his young body convulsing in agony, blood pooling beneath him as he clawed weakly at the floor, trying to drag himself away, to live for Taisha, for Carolyn, for the badge that meant everything. His breaths came in ragged wheezes, eyes wide with the unfairness of it all, a routine ticket turning into a grave in seconds. The store reeked of gunpowder and coppery blood, Overholt sobbing quietly behind the counter. Robert's hand trembled now, but he raised the gun again, pointing it down at Elston's head. The final shot rang out, execution style, into the skull of a man who'd only been doing his job. Elston Morris Howard, 24, gone. Just like that. A son, a brother, a father, a fiancé, erased in a hail of panic and lead. Can you picture it? The way his family's world shattered in that instant, the daughter who'd never know her dad's laugh, the fiancé collapsing in grief. It's the kind of tragedy that claws at your soul, reminding us how fragile life is when desperation collides with duty. With Elston's body still warm on the floor, Robert turned to Overholt, voice a harsh whisper. The money, now, and his stuff. The clerk, shaking, yanked open the register, $2.50 in crumpled bills, not even enough for a month's rent, and shoved it over, along with Elston's wallet, badge, and keys. Robert snatched it all, stuffing it into his pockets, the weight of what he'd done sinking in like lead. He bolted for the door, bell jingling again as he burst into the twilight, sprinting to Harvell's waiting car. Drive, go. Harvell gunned it, tires screeching, but as they merged into traffic, Robert spilled the truth in a rush. I had to. There was a security guard. I shot him. Harvell's face drained white. A cop? This wasn't robbery. This was murder. Rage and fear boiled over. You idiot. Get out. Harvell screamed, pulling the revolver from Robert's lap and firing once into his hand, the bullet ripping through flesh and bone. Pain exploded up Robert's arm, blood soaking his sleeve, but he grabbed the wheel with his good hand. No. Keep driving. The car swerved wildly, Harvell slumping back, cursing, as they raced towards safety, or so they hoped. What do you do when your partner's just killed a cop and you're bleeding out from his bullet? Robert, vision blurring from shock and pain, ditched Harvell blocks away, stealing the car and limping it to Ben Taub General Hospital. He burst into the ER around 8:30 p.m., clutching his mangled hand, mumbling about a street fight gone bad. But the nurses smelled gunpowder, saw the fresh ink of a parolee tat, and the dots connected fast. Cops swarmed within minutes. Description matching the bookstore call, blood on his clothes screaming guilt. Handcuffed to the gurney as doctors stitched him up, Robert cracked under the fluorescent lights. In a tape-recorded confession that would seal his fate, he laid it all out. The spree, the entry, the shots, the remorse twisting in his gut. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I'll face whatever punishment I got coming. Harvell got nabbed days later, hiding at his mom's place in Euless, but the real storm was Robert's. Capital murder charges piling on like the weight of that stolen badge. Meanwhile, Houston mourned. Elston's funeral drew 2,000 souls to the church, a sea of blue uniforms and tear-streaked faces. Ex-Mayor Kathy Whitmire and Police Chief Lee P. Brown stood shoulder to shoulder, voices breaking as they hailed him a hero lost too soon. Taisha, just a toddler, clutched a teddy bear. Carolyn whispered vows of strength amid the sobs. The city reeled, another officer down, another family fractured by a bullet meant for no one. Robert's spree had ended, but the echoes? They lingered for decades, a grim question hanging. Could one more chance, one more hand extended, have stopped the trigger that night? As the gurney wheels rolled him away, did he glimpse the abyss he'd opened? The trial loomed, and with it, a reckoning that would stretch 30 years into the shadows. Handcuffed to that hospital bed, blood still seeping through the bandages on his shattered hand, Robert gave the detectives everything. A calm, detailed, tape-recorded confession that ran over an hour. He described the robberies, the moment he saw the uniform, the panic, the 4 shots, the execution-style finish. I didn't go in there to kill nobody, he said, voice flat. But when I saw that gun on his side, I just lost it. That tape became the prosecution's atomic bomb. Yet when the capital murder trial began in March 1989 in Harris County, Robert pleaded not guilty. His public defenders tried to chip away at the confession, claimed the pain medication and trauma made it unreliable, but the judge let it in. Robert took the stand himself, something death penalty lawyers almost never allow. He told the jury he never meant to kill anyone, that he only wanted money for his family, that when he saw Officer Howard reach, pure terror took over and he just started shooting. He cried on the stand, said he was sorry 100 times, begged the Howard family for forgiveness right there in open court. You could hear sniffles in the gallery. Even a few reporters looked away. But the evidence was a tidal wave. The clerk, Larry Overholt, identified Robert's voice and build. David Harvell, the getaway driver who'd shot Robert in the hand that night, took a plea deal, 20 years for aggravated robbery, and testified against him, describing how Robert came running out saying, "I had to shoot the guard. He was a cop." Gunshot residue, the dead officer's badge and wallet found in Robert's possession, the .38 revolver recovered days later, it all pointed the same direction. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated less than 2 hours, guilty of capital murder. The punishment phase was brutal. Prosecutors paraded his prior robberies, the prison disciplinary reports, the cold-blooded final shot to the head. The defense brought Robert's mother to tears again. His mother on the stand, psychologists explaining the car wrecks, the baseball bat beating, the frontal lobe damage, the IQ of 68, the childhood no one should have to survive. Jurors looked shaken, some wiped their eyes. But on March 24, 1989, they came back with the answers Texas required. Yes, he would always be dangerous. No, there were no mitigating circumstances strong enough to spare his life. Death sentence. As the judge read it out, Robert just stared straight ahead, jaw tight, while somewhere behind him Elston Howard's mother let out a sound no words can describe. 30 years of appeals were about to begin, but that day in 1989, the story already felt finished. Strapped into the unyielding routine of Texas death row at the Allen B. Polunsky unit, a fortress of gray concrete and razor wire in Livingston, where the air hangs heavy with isolation, Robert Mitchell Jennings marked nearly 30 years like a man counting shadows on the wall. Sent there in 1989 after his death sentence, he joined hundreds of others in solitary confinement. Each day a mirror of the last, 23 hours locked in an 8 by 12-foot cell, the clang of steel doors punctuating the silence like a heartbeat. Morning started with the buzz of fluorescent lights flickering on at 4 a.m., the faint rattle of breakfast trays sliding through a slot, oatmeal or biscuits, whatever the kitchen scraped together. Afternoons blurred into rec time, if he chose it, an hour in a concrete pen under the open sky, pacing alone or staring at the fence line, muscles aching from disuse. Evenings brought the glow of a small TV tuned to news or old movies, or the scratch of a pencil on legal pads as he pored over case files with his lawyers. Books were his quiet companions, self-help tomes on redemption, maybe a Bible worn at the edges, stacked on the narrow ledge that passed for a desk. No group meals, no casual chats. Interactions with guards were clipped commands through the door, count time, or mail call, their boots echoing down the pod like distant thunder. With other inmates? Rare whispers through vents or shouts across the tier during rare phone calls home, bonds forged in shared despair but tested by the walls that bred paranoia and fights over nothing. Robert wasn't the wildfire he'd been in his youth. Those 13 disciplinary write-ups from his earlier prison stints, fights, rule-bending, faded into memory. On death row, he kept his head down, earning a nod from the Harris County Jail chaplain who later testified he wasn't incorrigible, just a man broken by circumstance. Remorse simmered beneath the surface, bubbling up in letters to his family and that raw confession from 1988, where he'd choked out sorrow for pulling the trigger. Over the decades, it deepened. He wrote apologies to the Howard family, unsigned but heartfelt, mailed through channels that rarely bridged the gulf. Religion crept in too, tentative at first, a prison ministry group visiting with prayers and pamphlets, then firmer, as a Baptist chaplain became a regular, guiding him through Bible studies that wrestled with forgiveness and the weight of blood on his hands. "The Lord knows my heart," he'd tell them, voice low, eyes searching for absolution that courts couldn't grant. But the appeals? They were his lifeline, a marathon of legal battles that dragged on like the humid East Texas nights. From state courts to the U.S. Supreme Court, his team hammered at flaws in the 1989 trial, botched jury instructions that buried his childhood trauma, brain injuries, and drug-fueled panic. Ineffective counsel who missed the mercy angle. Wins came in stays. A 2016 halt just weeks from the chamber. But losses piled up, each denial a door slamming shut, leaving him to wonder in the quiet hours if redemption was just another echo in the cell block. By January 30th, 2019, the calendar had caught up, the Supreme Court's rejection landing like a gavel at 5:35 p.m., sealing the end after 30 years of waiting. The day dawned ordinary, almost mocking in its calm. Robert rose with the lights, ate his standard breakfast of eggs and toast, then spent the morning in prayer with his spiritual advisor, a soft-spoken woman from the prison ministry who'd become like kin over the years. She held his hand through the bars, reciting psalms, as he murmured thanks for the time he'd had to reflect. Lunch came, fried chicken tenders, rice, and corn, the usual fare since Texas axed special last meals back in 2011, and he picked at it, stomach knotted. Afternoon brought visitors, his sister Carla, eyes red-rimmed, clutching photos of better days, a niece he'd never met in the flesh, her presence a bittersweet bridge to the outside world. Hugs were impossible, words exchanged through plexiglass, laced with "I love you" and "be strong." No fanfare, no breakdowns, just the heavy grace of goodbyes stretched too long. Around 5 p.m., guards in crisp uniforms led him from the pod, wrists cuffed behind. The walk to the death house a slow march past familiar faces who nodded solemnly. The Walls unit in Huntsville waited, its execution chamber a sterile blue room with one-way glass for witnesses, prosecutors stone-faced, Howard family members gripping tissues, reporters scribbling in the dim light. Strapped to the gurney at 6:15 p.m., for lines snaking into his arms, Robert turned his head toward the holding room where his loved ones watched unseen. His voice, steady despite the straps, carried his final words. "To my friends and family, it was a nice journey. To the family of the police officer, I hope this finds you peace and be well. Enjoy life's moments because we may never get them back. The pentobarbital flowed at 6:18, a chemical tide that slowed his breaths to whispers. He slipped away quietly, pronounced dead at 6:33 p.m., 18 minutes from start to silence. The needle's mercy swifter than the bullet he'd fired 3 decades before. Outside, protesters chanted under floodlights, while inside, chaplains prayed for souls on both sides of the glass. In the end, Robert Mitchell Jennings' story closes not with a bang, but a fading echo, a life unraveled by choices and chances missed, weighed against a family's endless grief. But was justice truly served in those 30 years of limbo? Or did the system grind out retribution at the cost of mercy we all crave? What do you think? Does a broken beginning excuse a deadly end, or should the state draw the line harder? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear where you land on this. If this tale hit home, hit like, subscribe for more deep dives into lives that linger in the shadows, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.